Good afternoon, everyone. It's going to take us a moment to get started. We had some technical difficulties. We'll just let people um, get admitted. My name's Wendy Sukier. I'm the academic lead for the Diversity Institute, and really grateful to those of you who stuck it out because I know there were some technical challenges for all of us. There were quite a few people registered, so we'll just wait a couple of minutes. I think we're probably, some more people may come in, but perhaps we can get started. So welcome today, and thanks to our sponsors for helping organize this event, which is called The Power of Intention, Board Diversity Best Practices Realized, a conversation with the Canadian Western Bank. And I wanted to also give a shout out to 30% Club and Jennifer Laidlaw, their country coordinator, for their help in organizing this. So first and foremost, I want to acknowledge that we're on the traditional territory of the Mississauga of the Credit, the Haudenosaunee, the Chippewa, the Wendat, and the Anishinaabe peoples. And many of you know that the university formerly known as Ryerson is now Toronto Metropolitan University, partly as a sign of our commitment to truth and reconciliation, and it certainly informs everything that we do. I wanted to note that there's a little globe at the bottom on the panel, which allows simultaneous French translation for those of you who would like it. You just have to click that button. And I wanted to provide a brief presentation to sort of set the stage, but given that we've lost a fair amount of time, I'm only going to touch on a couple of key points that we were going to cover, and the presentation will be made available to participants in this session, and we're happy to answer any questions. So I'll skip over talking about the Diversity Institute, other than to say we have 130 full-time staff, several hundred participant partners, and one of the key things that's relevant to today is we're one of the ecosystem partners with the federal government's 50/30 challenge. We're based in a business school, so all of our work connects equity, diversity, and inclusion, not just to social justice, but also to the business case. And we know from the research that we've done, and it was very much exacerbated by COVID, that inequality remains a significant problem at all levels in organizations, but most particularly at the top. Some of you are familiar with the work that we've done through Diversity Leads, others have as well. But when you look at representation, whether we're talking about boards or senior leadership, we still see that women are underrepresented, but even more so, we see other diverse peoples are underrepresented. And if you look, for example, at Toronto, half the population's women. They represent about 39% of overall board seats, including corporations, nonprofits, and so on. But racialized people, who are the same proportion in the population, are only 16%. And while for every white woman, there's a racialized woman in the GTA, white women outnumber racialized women by a factor of 13-1. So that's part of the reason why we believe that gender representation remains a very important priority, but we have to move beyond gender. And there's lots more research to support this. The 30% Club has definitely had an impact when we compare representation by sector on boards across the TSX And then we look at executive teams and we compare what we see among members of the 30% club and the general business population. And I point this out, and the research is available, because what it signals to me, at least, is that intention matters. And those organizations that signed up for the 30% club signaled their intentions to increase representation of women on boards and followed through and made a difference. And now they're looking at other dimensions of diversity and inclusion as well. When we think then about how to move this agenda forward, it's important, I believe, to recognize that we need strategies that address societal level issues, challenge stereotypes in the media, provide frameworks, codes, even legislation to encourage organizations to move forward. But there are also things individual organizations can do, and that's going to be the focus of our talk today, in terms of putting in place policies and practices to improve representation at the senior-most levels, in part by having comprehensive strategies. Because if you don't pay attention to who comes in the door and your entry level representation, you will not see diversity at the top of the house. And so there are lots of mechanisms we could talk about in detail. I did today want to highlight a bit about the 50-30 challenge, which encourages organizations to commit to gender parity. That's the 50%, as well as increased diversity. That's the 30%. And diversity in this context includes Indigenous peoples, racialized peoples, persons with disabilities, as well as those from the LGBTQ2S+ community. And we have lots of materials we can send you on the 50-30 initiative, and very importantly, the supports that are available to organizations that want to move forward. There are toolkits, there are training resources, etc., and we will share that with you afterwards. We also, and the final thing I wanted to signal is, as I said, you can't change who's at the top of the house if you don't have a comprehensive strategy. And in our minds, this addresses not just leadership and governance and overall strategic mission, goals, and so on. Doesn't just address HR, although that's important. And of course, we know culture eats strategy. So it's really important to think about culture when we're looking at inclusion and to consider metrics. But in our view, it also includes diversity right across the value chain. How you develop your products and services, where you spend your money, what your procurement policies are, who you engage with, and how you market and promote your services. And I really will just, as I said, all of this is available, and I won't dwell on it other than to say we're more than happy to support organizations. We're committed to sharing best practices. This is one of those opportunities to learn more about what companies are actually doing to move beyond intentions, to put their words into action. So with that, I'd like to turn to our fireside chat and to introduce our panelists today. So first off, we have Ian Reid, who is chair, there he is, of the Canadian Western Bank's Governance and Conduct Review Committee and a member of the Audit Committee, and has been a real driver for work related to equity, diversity, and inclusion in that context. For those of you who don't know Ian, he's also a member of many boards of public and private companies, and can share a lot of rich personal experience. Our next panelist is Gary Mitchell, who's the chair of Canadian Western Bank's Risk Committee. And
actually, Wendy, it's Gay Mitchell.
Oh, sorry, Gay. Apologies.
No worries.
I was looking for someone else. Anyways, Gay is the chair of the Canadian Western Bank's Risk Committee and a member of the Governance and Conduct Review Committee. She was previously deputy chair of RBC Wealth Management, and she also serves on a wide range of private and public boards, and is a fellow of the Institute of Canadian Bankers, and holds the ICD.D designation. Next, we have Marie Delorme, who is a new board member with Canadian Western Bank, and she's the CEO of Imagination Group of Companies, with extensive experience as a director of numerous private companies, charitable organizations, including the Donner Canadian Foundation, the Canadian Centre to End Human Trafficking, the National Indigenous Economic Development Board, Queen's, Mount Royal, and the RCMP Foundation. She's also a member of the Order of Canada and has many, many awards. And last but certainly not least is Raoul Bardwaj, who is the president and CEO of the Institute of Corporate Directors, and he will be moderating today's fireside chat. He leads an organization of nearly 15,000 members committed to improving national outcomes by growing board leadership and governance capacities. He currently serves on the boards of the Rideau Hall Foundation, supporting the Governor General of Canada, and the Institute, obviously the Institute of Corporate Directors, the Executive Committee of the Global Network of Director Institutes, as well as the Leader Council at the Institute for Leadership at Ivey. He has many examples of service that he could share. And at this point, I will turn it over to him to chair the panel. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks very much, Wendy. Hello to everybody. Good morning or good afternoon, depending where you are. Gay, Ian, Marie, thanks for joining us today. It's nice to see you all. Ian, I got a note you're a little under the weather, so if we'll give you a break on your vocal cords, and we'll ask Gay to pick up a little bit on that. But we're really blessed today to have some directors from a very significant organization in Canada that's had quite the journey, I would say, on diversity. So I'm going to ask the three of you to bring us into the boardroom and what some of the more interesting conversations you may have had along the way. And what we're proposed to do over the next little while is we're going to talk about the lead up to 2020, which was a decision where you really made to embark on diversity and make it real within the organization. Talk a little bit about the process, some of the outcomes, and then let's touch on some of the takeaways and the learnings. And Marie, we're going to come to you, but it's probably going to be a little bit later on. I'm not going to ask you to fact check Ian or Gay's answers, but I am going to ask you to talk about your own experience, and then maybe we'll lead it off a little bit to advice to other people that are looking to serve on boards who could be coming from diverse backgrounds, or we'll get into a little bit more about your own experience. But let's contextualize it for a minute. So we're really talking about 2020. We're into COVID now. George Floyd has now taken place, which has created a really different and quite dynamic environment for discussion around diversity. And here we are now. Ian, I'll go to you first. You're chair of the governance committee at CWB, and everybody looks at you to say, okay, Ian, what are we going to do now? And where were you in the conversation around diversity at CWB at that time? And how did 2020 end up being an impetus to take you across the finish line?
And thanks, Raul. And if I could, just as a little bit of context, I'd like to just make a couple quick comments about CWB. And I like the word journey that you referred to right off the bat. It truly has been a journey in terms of our board renewal and pursuit of diversity on the board. historically, I joined the board. I was invited to stand for election in 2011. And the night before our AGM, we had a board dinner, and I recall meeting my fellow nominees at that time and doing a mental tally of their tenure and history with the bank. And our bank we're in our third decade right now, so we're upstarts. We're a young company, and truly, in many ways, we've been on this journey. But when I met my fellow director nominees at that dinner, I did a mental tally on their tenure, and it came just under 20 years average service, which was roughly the age of the bank at that time. So, the culture of the board at that point was care, feeding, protection. Most of these people, many of them were founders of the bank, and they were really just starting their board renewal process at that point. So in a very traditional way, they looked at the portfolio of the bank and the new direction. They recognized, for example, two new directors had backgrounds in equipment financing, being myself, and another very deep background in wealth management, two key thrusts for the bank at that time. So I would say that, back in 2011, we were just barely at the starting line and looking through a very traditional lens about board renewal. Very shortly after that, we started to recognize the diversity that was missing on our board, largely focused on gender. And through a series of renewal moves over the next number of years, we ended up, I guess, at a position today where we're a little over 50% of our board is composed of females. So again, fairly basic focus, but deliberate and to the theme, power of intention. We needed to make deliberate moves to make that kind of composition shift in our board. Leading up to 2020, the Floyd tragedy and all the things that brought attention to our group, I think I can best summarize our discussions at CWB, and particularly the nominating committee, being around the history of never actually going outside to a search firm to recruit a board director. There's a lot of people interested in our board. We've never had a challenge finding really good people. But the crux of the discussion was really, we don't know the people that we're looking to recruit to, significantly diversify our board. And we did talk about race, we did talk about age, we talk about geography, we talk about acquisitions that we made. We had recently made a wealth management acquisition and acquired the largest Indigenous wealth management business in Canada. And we looked around the table and we said, we don't know who we don't know. So for the first time ever in 2020, we engaged outside search firm, gave them a broad range of criteria we were looking for, and we're pleased when they came to us, I think by memory, with 30 some odd individuals, mostly unknown to any of us on the board. So we had to open our eyes and we had to find a path that showed us some opportunities that we weren't well aware of at that point.
Great. That's a great sort of a sequence of events. Very helpful. And maybe I'll come to you. Maybe you can sort of situate yourself. When did you come into the conversation, and maybe talk a little bit about what the nature of the conversation was at the board, and particularly why the board decided to really embark on this journey of diversity?
Thanks very much, Rahul. I joined the CWB board January of 2019. And, I think to echo some of the comments that Ian had said already, we've had certainly good female or gender diversification on our board, but it was really an opportunity for us to step back as we look at the natural succession planning process that any board is involved in. It was an opportunity to say to ourselves, it's not only the business experience and the values and the cultural fit that we need to extend here and in the normal course, but as well the lived experiences of people in Canada. We were good at some aspects of diversity, but we were insufficient at really mirroring the Canadian society. And that became an imperative in our discussions at the board. This was not a one quarter conversation, one shot conversation. We chose to evolve this over a number of different meetings to really make sure that we had full understanding, not only of our committee priorities and what we wanted in terms of selecting potential new directors, but as well making sure our full board was apprised of what we were thinking, and that we were integrating their thoughts also into some of the deliberations that we had, which also included, as Ian has mentioned, going outside of our own network and really working with a search firm to push them to help us identify people that we should be aware of. So I'd say that it took a number of quarters for us to build that consensus around our priorities, of which racial diversification was one of the 3 critical priorities. 2 other areas that we felt were very important for a board, given our industry in financial services, was to expand on our technology skill set at the board level. Things are changing rapidly in financial services, and that was an important criteria. And as well, to integrate the 3rd priority that we had was really around support for the overall strategy of CWB, which is to be the best bank for business owners. And so we really wanted to have some augmentation to entrepreneurial skill sets at our board. So we worked with the search firm to really help them flesh out a draft mandate of what they were looking for. And those 3 aspects were very deliberate from our standpoint to make sure that they got that right.
Great. And Ian, maybe I'll bring you back into this, and maybe you can pick up on Gay's comment around the strategic rationale for doing this. You know, you're introducing something new in terms of a process, and we'll get into some of the nitty gritty around the board matrix and things like that. But what was the strategic rationale from your standpoint, and how did you have to present it to the rest of the board?
Yeah, good comments, Gay, in terms of the key priorities and rationale. About 4 or 5 years ago, we set a target for ourselves to be the best banking solution for business customers in Canada. A pretty lofty ambition, and it had some key components. It recognized Canada, not just the Western Canada, with our deep roots here. It recognized that we, had a unique strength in terms of our minimal number of retail branches when we talk about competing in the bank space, and that we generally were more nimble and light foot in terms of responding to business customers. So another piece of our strategy was obviously not to ignore the retail space, but to provide unique solutions for business owners. And when we looked at our board, another thing that we recognized and looked at our diversity on the board was we didn't really have a lot of entrepreneurial spirit on our board. We were, a mixture of corporate and legal and banking backgrounds, but we were missing the entrepreneurial spirit, and we were missing something in the way of age diversity. I'm not big on doing the math all the time, but our board average age has been coming down gradually. And that's recognizing that I'm one of the old guys now that kind of push that number up higher. But our clientele is shifting towards a younger, as we see the shift of wealth in Canada going generationally, our customers are typically getting younger and more entrepreneurial in terms of our target customers. So their background, their makeup is more racially diverse than previously. So we just recognized that we needed to start to look outside of our comfort zone and our network, as Gay describes it, and find people that represent our target customers. And, thankfully in 2021, when we concluded our search for 2 new board members, we ended up again having our youngest board member come onto the board, a fellow by the name of Irfan Raji, very entrepreneurial individual. Marie, with all of her incredible insights and experiences and background, those 2 individuals gave us completely different experience and perspective, in terms of how we conduct our business. So very, very valuable in our strategic discussions go forward. And, proud to say that we're not done. We're continuing on with our board renewal, and our next focus in coming weeks and months will be another deep review and a search for additional directors for our next AGM in the spring.
That'll get folks' attention. That's good to hear. Gay, I want you to pick up on that for a second then. You're chair of the risk committee, and you introduced the notion of diversity being linked to the strategy. We're talking about it at the board level, but was there a broader initiative across the organization to align diversity with strategy, or was this just a board initiative to start with?
No, clearly for us, I think strategy, certainly management presents a strategy to the board, and the board deliberates that strategy. But you have to be able to look throughout the organization to identify the links to what is important to us and how we need to evolve going forward. As Ian touched on, we certainly have a client base that is very diverse, business owners across the country, and they come from all different types of lived experiences and business experiences. And that was very important for us. Our employee base also has to mirror what we see in society. And that's also a very important aspect of our strategy. So this can't be something that is not felt or already understood and addressing. It has to be done right throughout the organization. It was, in my view, in actual fact, the board was later to the table in really pushing that diversity agenda than our employee population, and how we have led our human resources to really be able for our clients to see what we look like, who we are, how we want to help them be successful. And of course, our client base is Canadian. So I think that the board was actually a little bit, we were behind in needing to evolve to support the diverse aspects of our culture as evident within our strategy.
Great. So let's pick this up a little bit around the process side then. Did you actually develop a diversity policy? What were the discussions around the matrix like? Did you actually end up setting, targets, aspirational or otherwise?
Well, I'll take that on, and we'll try and save Ian's voice, but we have had a policy of diversity throughout CWB. So that wasn't an issue. It was more around being very clear and thoughtful and deliberate with the search firm that we selected in asking them this and telling them this is what we are looking for. We had specific attributes that we were looking for. You referenced earlier a skills matrix. Certainly our board has had one established for a long time, and we evolve it as we all go forward and bring new people on. But the matrix really was a supporting tool. The board evaluation process that Ian had recently, prior to this in 2020, had recently led an annual review of evaluating our performance. So when you look at how are we performing and what do we need to be more effective? What kind of skills and experiences do we have on our board? Are there any gaps with what we need? And then importantly, looking to the lineup with our strategy and where we need to go in the future, what is presenting itself that we actually need to really force ourselves to augment in terms of the board composition. And so that was working with the search firm. It was very important. We went through a couple of drafts of trying to get that right. We've had a number of conversations with them about making sure that some of the initial findings and lists that they were bringing to us were representative of that mandate that we were choosing to proceed with them. When we got down to narrowing the long list, as Ian has suggested, it was quite a long list, which was a great statement about the talent that is out there. We actually had to whittle down to a short list. And that short list for us was very important because were we seeing exactly what we needed to see and the best of what we needed to see from a number of the candidates? And you never know until you actually get them in front of you. So we had a second stage where we interviewed, and it was interesting. Our committee actually chose to do team interviews. So all of us on the committee met with a group of candidates that were on the shorter list, and then we took it another step to an even shorter list. I think that it was very important to do that because we really needed to understand what individuals were bringing. Part of this is yes, their experiences, their business experiences, but their lived experiences, their mindset. How diverse is that coming into our discussions? Their culture, their value system. And it was, I think, while a lot of work from my standpoint, it was very rich work and very rewarding. I'm going to have to correct my friend Ian. He said we went out and intentionally looked for 2 new directors. At the time, we actually were in a search for 1. But the outcome after we had the review with the final candidates, it became our committee's recommendation to the full board that we actually expand our board by an additional person than we had initially sought. And that's where we brought on 2 new directors. I find it of interest that this was all happening in COVID for the most part. And we had also identified since COVID hit, we've actually brought on 3 new directors onto the CWB board. So it's really, you know, it's not easy interviewing people over Zoom or whatever technology you might be using. It's much more difficult. And we really had to push the search firm and to push ourselves to make sure that we were having the right conversation to get to the outcome that we got to.
Super. Marie, I'm going to come to you in a minute. I haven't forgotten about you. You're getting to hear what went on in the boardroom when you weren't there. So hopefully you'll find this all very interesting. Ian, I did want to come back to you. You'd mentioned earlier about bringing the board to a consensus around this issue. And, you know, here you are, you know, in COVID, there's so many things going on, so many different priorities. What did you have to do to get diversity, particularly board diversity, to the point of a priority with your board to be able to move as quickly as you did? And that's sort of the part 1. The part 2 is, would you have done anything different in hindsight? I mean, what did you learn through this process as well?
Thanks, Raul. Gay talked about our board assessment review, and you know, the whole time I've been chair of the governance committee, I've incorporated not only traditional kind of questionnaires, you know, that do a self-assessment and external assessments, but I've incorporated personal interviews with each director, which take, you know, probably an hour plus on an annual basis. And I'm looking for a number of things, but what I'm really looking for is the between the lines items, key gems that don't come out in a written assessment, about what we're missing on our board, about where individual directors think our company is going, and skills that are not present around the skills or perspectives not present around the board table and could significantly improve the discussions we have strategically and culturally around the table. So the other thing that I think is important, and I just mention it because I put a lot of value in it, but in those interviews, I ask every director their intentions for service, subject obviously to the will of the shareholders. So I could tell you, out of all of our 11 directors, what they have in their mind, whether they're set retirement plans or their thoughts around ideal tenure for a board director, and it just helps us plan our board renewal out, 4 or 5 or 6 years as opposed to just 1 year at a time. So, I think we try and be very inclusive with our board, even though the governance committee is responsible for setting direction in terms of the nominations and the direction of what we're looking for. We reach out to every director to make sure that we consider their input into the whole thing and we have the complete picture. And, if you got a diverse board, you'd be really remiss if you didn't pay attention to what all your diverse perspectives could add in terms of those discussions. So just fast forwarding to right today, we're in the process of reviewing our skills matrix, skills and experience matrix. It's got some different pieces to reflect today's realities, much more emphasis on components of ESG, different aspects of geography, a variety of different things that are coming into the skills matrix. But every board member will have input into how that matrix is composed. And out of that will come the first steps towards what we're looking at in terms of next round of renewal and recruitment.
Perfect segue to Marie. Marie, you've been really patient. Now you've heard everything that was going on inside the boardroom while you were on the outside. So what we really want to hear is, what was your experience through this process? And you've been through a number of processes for a number of boards and organizations. So tell us a little bit about your experience through this.
Thank you, Rahul. Yes, I've been doing this for a little over 25 years. So this is good to know what was happening behind the scenes. Well, the first unique aspect was CWSB's use of a search firm. And, obviously that's a best practice. And I'm finding more and more organizations are taking that approach, especially when they're looking to diversify their governance bodies. Engaging at that level not only provides the organization opportunity to cast a wider net, but as a potential candidate, it also allowed me to research the organization and explore those preliminary questions that I had with the search firm before I even had a conversation with Ian and Gay and the CEO. Whenever I'm approached to consider a governance role, I have some very clear criteria and some preliminary questions that really are a bit of a gating process, because I want to determine if there's any value for all of the parties to proceed to more in-depth discussions and next steps. And one of the first questions I had was, why me? And I was looking for some very specific answers. I did not want to be the diversity candidate. Gay and Ian both talked about the board matrix, and that was of particular interest to me. I wanted to know that my skills, my background, my knowledge, my abilities, in addition to being a diverse candidate, had the potential to fill gaps that existed in the board. Something was happening coincident with their recruitment process. I was working with a group of 25 national Indigenous organizations on developing a national Indigenous economic strategy. We actually had the press release in June on that. And one of the calls to economic prosperity in that national strategy is a call for increased representation of Indigenous peoples on corporate boards. So I thought it was quite interesting that CWB called just as we were working on that particular section of the strategy. So my reflection of the process was, it was professional, it was comprehensive, it was highly respectful, and most importantly to me, it it was candid. They had the right answers. They were well prepared. They were very, very clear when I asked them the same questions you just asked them about the strategy and the approach and the direction that the organization was taking. And of course I did my research, and I was very encouraged to see 2 Indigenous people on the senior management team.
Super. And Marie, built into your answer, there are some really good advice for others that would be interested in both serving on boards and engaging in the candidate selection process. I think the type of questions you put on the table are really important. Can you comment a little bit about the onboarding as well? And that's a little bit of a platform to maybe another word I want to put on the table, and that's inclusion. And in terms of the whole process from equity, diversity to inclusion, your thoughts on your onboarding and maybe some comments on what you think inclusion looks like.
Yeah, that's a very good question. First of all, this was the most comprehensive onboarding process I have ever experienced in over 2 decades. First of all, myself and Irfan Raji, that was mentioned earlier, were invited to attend 2 full board meetings before we were even forward at an AGM as candidates for the shareholders to vote on. That was very helpful because it gave me an opportunity to understand the organization in a more in-depth way, but more importantly, to have a sense of the culture of the board and to get to know the people. And although during that period, of course, everything was being done remotely, it was a very effective process. The second piece, after being nominated to the board and voted on, was the onboarding process itself. It consisted of 14 2-hour orientation sessions with every member of the senior management team, members of the board. It was incredibly comprehensive and was all designed to allow both of us to hit the ground running. It without a doubt was the best onboarding process I have ever experienced. It was obviously a lot of thought and a lot of preparation on the part of every one of the senior management team and the board members who took part in that.
So that's great. I mean, it's good to hear that they set you up for success and that you feel you've been set up well to succeed. But maybe a little bit of commentary as well around inclusion then, because you made the point that you don't want to be the notionally token diversity candidate on a board, and you want to be engaged with the strategy. So inclusion being the next step. How do you see that manifesting itself?
Well, there's a little saying that the difference between diversity and inclusion, and diversity is being asked to dance, but inclusion is being asked to dance. And I was definitely asked to dance from day one by people on the governance committee, Ian and Gay, and of course the chair at the time, the CEO. It really is a bit of a dance, actually. I think it's a wonderful metaphor, right? Because there are the 2 parties engaged in it. And I felt welcomed from day one. Being invited to the 2 meetings is something that is highly unusual to bring at that time outsiders into a board meeting. And that has just continued on. It's been a little bit over a year on the board now, and it's very welcoming. The environment of the bank truly lives up to its vision and its aspirations.
That's great to hear. I think I'll always have the image of CWB as the board that dances now, and that's not such a bad thing, by the way. So we're getting close to the top of the hour. I'm going to hand it back to Wendy in a moment. I know she's got a bit of an update here, but Gay, Ian, you've heard Marie's commentary around this. Is there anything you want to add in terms of closing messages? And maybe Gay, I'll go to you first.
Sure, thanks, Rahul. I think that one of the things that I would say is that when you are serious and intentional about diversity at your board, excuse me, it's indicative that the board has a mindset that is open beyond what it might be hearing from management, beyond what it might be hearing from current board members, that you really are actually seeking some gems and jewels to come into that conversation that are going to make you stop, listen, and really consider a different point of view. I would also like to think that having a diverse board that is truly genuine in what it's looking for actually helps us as a board to see problems around the corner. They're not red flag type of problems, because we would be aware of the red flag type of problems already. These are things that are happening societally, business, etc., that helps us to see around the corner. And I think a diverse board with a diverse mindset and really having different experiences, both in the business world, lived experiences, I think all of that coming together in a board is what makes good governance really evolve and set a new standard for ourselves to continue to achieve.
Right. Ian, quick last comment before we hand it back to Wendy.
Yeah, very quick. Marie's comments about candid conversations during interviews and consideration, the dance that we were doing. Marie was very, very candid with us and clear that she was clearly not interested in kind of the token Indigenous representation on the board, to the point that following our interview discussion, Marie, I don't know if I ever told you this, but I went to our CEO and said, I need you to assure me that we are really serious about pursuing and growing our business in this segment, because if we're not, we should not be inviting Marie to join our board. Her intentions are genuine, and ours need to be equally genuine and aligned. So, and I had it confirmed, obviously, that this was an important direction for us and needed to be supported. So,
super. Well, thank you all. That was a great conversation. Wendy, over to you.
Thanks so much. And again, apologies for the technical problems. Really appreciate everybody sticking with us, and it was definitely worthwhile. I also just really wanted to underscore some of the comments that were made about Canadian Western Bank, not just from the point of view of the intentionality around board diversity in terms of gender, Indigenous peoples, and others, but also the way in which those commitments cascade through the organization. And as was mentioned, that it's not about tokenism. It's about really thinking through the implications of these issues for your lines of business. I know for a fact that the organization sort of puts its money where its mouth is in terms of its corporate social responsibility and partnerships with organizations committed to advancing gender equality and increased diversity. So I think it's a fabulous case study, and I really, really appreciate the time that you took to spend with us today. There were questions posted that we didn't get around to. We will pull those down and make sure we get answers. You will get the video of the event is available for people who weren't able to stay for the whole thing. The slides and other materials will be shared with you, but really, really want to thank our panelists, our fabulous moderator, and everybody who helped make this event successful. Thank you very much.